Our next speaker is Jane Golding, who is Chair of British in Europe. She is an EU law specialist who lives in Berlin and chairs British in Europe, which is a coalition of 11 UK citizens groups based across the EU 27 countries. The 3 Million and British in Europe have worked very closely together, so we're happy to welcome her here.
Thank you very much, Ilse, and it's really been great working with the 3 Million on this lobbying, on our lobbying campaign. And great to see so many people here today, and it's a special thank you to all the British citizens who've come from their homes in other EU 27 countries to be here today. Thank you. So, there are approximately 1.2 million British in Europe. Around 20% of those are the famous pensioners in Spain and elsewhere, although they're not the homogenous group that is painted in the tabloids. And then the other 70 to 80% of us are of working age and economically active across the EU 27, which is something which is not always made clear when we're talking about British citizens in Europe. Myself, like my 3 Million and British in Europe colleagues, I left the UK to move to go and work in another EU country. In my case, I left the UK in recession in the early 90s, and in the immortal words of Norman Tebbit, I got on my bike, or at least a ferry to Belgium, to look for my first job. That was soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I soon met a very nice East German. We got married, and we have lived in 4 different countries together, and I'm now living in Berlin, his hometown, after he spent more than 20 years away from Berlin. So I moved in good faith, and with the legitimate expectation that the rights that I had as an EU citizen, I would continue to have for the rest of my life, and that I would be able to rely on those for the rest of my life. These rights are now at risk through no fault of our own. The majority of the 3 million did not have a vote in the referendum, and the same is true of British in Europe. Due to the 15-year rule, we estimate over 60% of us who were directly affected by the referendum could not vote and did not have a say. And since the referendum, all of us, EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU, have been living in great uncertainty, unable to make decisions, unable to get on with our lives. Essentially, we've been living in limbo. So this is a matter of fundamental justice. I'm a lawyer. And this is why we are asking for all of our current citizens' rights to be recognised and to continue in their entirety. And I mean, it's, as Paul Blumenfeld mentioned, it's not just a matter of rights of residence. It's a complex bundle of interlinked rights that allow us to go and live in another country, make our lives there. We want all of those guaranteed as soon as possible in the withdrawal agreement between the EU and the UK, properly implemented, effectively enforced with supernatural jurisdiction, preferably of the Court of Justice, and that this agreement should be ring-fenced from the rest of the negotiations, because if it's not, we still can't sleep at night, until it is. So as I said, simply confirming a right of residence is not enough. For example, I work in Germany. I might be given the right to remain in Germany, but if my qualifications are not recognised and I can't continue to work in Germany and I can't provide an income to my family, what point is my right to remain? So how close are we to reaching our objective of guaranteeing all of our existing rights? And here I'm just going to talk a little bit, I'll go into a bit of legal detail now about what's happened over the summer in the 2 rounds of negotiations. And I'll talk about how they've affected the UK citizens in the EU in particular now. The EU position looked pretty good, the starting point, at the beginning of the negotiations, well, before they started, because it looked as if the starting point was to confirm all our existing rights. Things have moved over the summer, and the big issue that UK citizens in the EU are worried about now is free movement. So the current EU position would only protect our existing rights in the country in which we live now. So that would mean not cross-border. We couldn't move across the rest of the EU 27. So it'd be locked into one country. At the moment, we have access to 28 member states, plus the EEA and Switzerland, and I make full use of that access in my professional and personal life, as do many others in British in Europe. It's a really important issue for us. So this would not allow us to continue to live our lives as we do now. And unfortunately, that whole issue about free movement has a knock-on effect for a whole range of other issues which affect both our groups: mutual recognition of qualifications, economic rights, rights to set up businesses, which would only at the moment be guaranteed in the country where we're living now. So it's a key issue, this. And our feeling is, if the UK doesn't show flexibility on the status of EU citizens in the UK to ensure that those with rights of permanent residence have a lifelong right to return, instead of losing this after a 2 years absence from the UK, we don't see the EU moving on its position on free movement. And I have to say, it makes economic and business sense to do something about this, because if we don't get rights, cross-border rights, then that sets a bad precedent for the negotiations of the future trade agreement. And how likely, if you can't get those rights for people who are in situ now, how likely will it be that the UK government will be able to negotiate those for UK citizens in future? We've got a few other issues. I mean, there's some issues about family members, whether their rights will be confirmed as family members or individuals, and how that could affect young people. There's also the 2-year rule, because both sides are saying rights of permanent residence, but if you have an absence of more than 2 years, you would not have an automatic right to return, and we think both sides need to be flexible on that. And then, as far as healthcare is concerned, we're glad to see that the UK has changed its position on social security rights, is particularly on pensions, that both pre-Brexit and post-Brexit contributions would count, and that it seems as if both sides have agreed the overall continuance of the reciprocal healthcare system. So, what can we do about all these issues? What's the solution to it? And my solution would be to say, well, wouldn't the easiest way to approach this, apart from the fact that this would be the right thing to do, simply to confirm all our existing rights? So the last thing I want to say is, and why not do that? Because we are, after all, a finite group of mortal people, 4.2 million, of which the 1.2 million British citizens are the largest national group, and we shouldn't forget that. And also there are precedents for this, what happened when Greenland left and what the UK is proposing as far as Irish citizens are concerned. And finally, it's not about an immigration status. It's about people who have rights, who've relied on those in good faith and have built lives on them. And now it's up to the UK and the EU to do the right thing. Thank you very much.